How's it going, everybody? Welcome into the Skyline Sports Podcast. I am your host, Jack Hartman, joined as always by my good buddy, my co-host on the West Coast, Nick Normand. Nick, how you doing today, man?
Doing well today, Jack. Just been fighting some sickness the last couple weeks, but super fired up to be here with you. Was really it was just so fun chatting with you the last couple of days. You gave me some insights about some stuff going on with the Shrine Bowl since you were there on site with that in Dallas. Some really good stories that to just be able to go to a football game and not a super competitive one at that, since it's just one of these bowl season kind of games. But to be able to have the stories and see what's going on and be feet on the ground there. Super fired up to be able to get to talk with you about it. Although only game left in the NFL is the Super Bowl, and Pro Bowl, we don't really care about flag football. Nobody really gives a damn. But Super Bowl, it's still coming up. Chiefs, Eagles. We'll jump into that in a minute, but there's still a lot of fun going on. Football's going to be still in full swing, I think, in the offseason. I think you and I got a lot of thoughts with college next year and with the NFL draft and free agency. There's going to be a lot to talk about, and so super stoked about that with you. How are you doing today, Jack?
Yeah, I'm doing well. You mentioned I was at the Shrine Bowl last night, so it was a late night getting back, but yeah, it was really cool, really fun. Got to bump elbows with some people you just never would have expected. It was a fun time. It was really cool. Fun to be there. Fun to see some of these guys. But yeah, like you said, Super Bowl Sunday is as of recording this 2 Sundays away, 9 days away. And so we're just going to talk briefly about it. We'll talk more about the Super Bowl next week. But yeah, on this last Sunday, the Chiefs beat the Bills. Josh Allen falls to 0-4 against Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs, and the Eagles beat the Commanders. Just some quick takeaways. You know, if the Chiefs can't stop Saquon Barkley, then I don't think that they're going to win the Super Bowl, is the way that I see it. Saquon Barkley's just on another level right now, and he showed that against the Commanders this last week. And on top of that, apparently neutralizing Travis Kelce is not the key to success against the Chiefs. Those are sort of my biggest takeaways from each game. The Bills did a really good job of not letting Travis Kelce go crazy like he had the week before against the Texans, but still just couldn't quite get it done. The Chiefs always find a way. So Nick, what are some of your biggest takeaways from Championship Sunday and going into Super Bowl Sunday?
Yeah, it kind of went the way that I thought it would. To me, the matchups were kind of clear who should have been favored this whole time, where it's okay, the Eagles are far more talented than Washington. It's not even close, where if you flip Jaden Daniels and Jalen Hurts, I think it's even more of a blowout. I think it's 60-20. I think it would be an absolute mess with the quarterbacks flipped as well, where, okay, Terry McLaurin would be a starter on this Eagles offense, but outside of that, it's Brian Robinson, Zach Ertz isn't starting on this team. Any of these other receivers, it's okay. Even Terry McLaurin, he'd start on this Eagles team, but he would start behind A.J. Brown and probably above Smith. And so, okay, your number one receiver and weapon would be their third or fourth best offensive player. That's ridiculous. So yeah. Just felt like the talent disparity was super massive, and it showed out to be really massive. Jaden Daniels, so impressive. Best rookie year by a quarterback ever. Big Ben's the only other QB that comes to mind. Him and Purdy both made it to their respective championship games. Mm-hmm. But both Purdy and Big Ben, they were being carried by their teams more than they were actually playing well. Jaden was not getting carried by his team. He was carrying the team. Yeah. And so to be able to make it this far, being the main engine for your offense, just so impressive. Jaden Daniels, I think, is stamped as a top 10 quarterback. You might look at him higher up even in the top 10 than that. borderline top 5 potentially. But I think that Washington definitely, they're in an awesome spot. They're the Packers and Texans from last year where you're ahead of schedule and can you make the right decisions to take another step? And neither of those teams took another step this year. But can Washington? The answer is a strong maybe. And other side of the bracket, it's just another classic. Another Bills-Chiefs just shootout. The offense is really doing an awesome job. The defense is being able to stop Josh Allen on a lot of those short down conversions. Whether or not you believe that the refs stopped him, that the refs got the call right. Either way, the Chiefs' defense was stout. They were really strong. They knew what was coming. They played powerfully. They dominated at the line of scrimmage when they needed to. And, that's just super impressive, where it's kind of what we expected. We know what these teams are going to do, and they never seem to disappoint. It's just an awesome game with the two best players in the game whenever they play each other. So that's kind of where I was at with it. Not a whole lot of surprises. Happy that Jaden got here and really hope that he gets some support to go farther. Where were you kind of at with both of these games?
Yeah, I think with the Commanders, I knew that the Eagles, were going to win that game. It seemed like the Commanders, when they played the Lions, showed they're like, this is our best hand. This is what we do at our best to make us the best team we can possibly be and perform as high above expectation as we can. And so they did that, and it worked against the Lions, but then that was on tape, and the Eagles had that to see. I ditto everything you said about Jaden Daniels, just incredible. And I would even add that, the Commanders lost that game not because of Jaden Daniels. I mean, there were multiple fumbles that, he was had nothing to do with. He played a really solid game. But between that and the Eagles offense, being like a hot knife through butter, there's only so much that he could do. And so it was just really, really great season for him. I think I would safely pen him as the top quarterback in the NFC going into next season. I would not feel like it would be. I would not feel bad about making that decision for myself personally. He just played that well and has shown that potential. But who knows? Will we see a regression like CJ Stroud had this year? We'll see. Bills Chiefs game, man. I've always and will continue to hold out that things are not rigged. Nothing's happening because of this. Nothing's happening because of that. But before this last Sunday, I was like, people that believe that are ridiculous. After this last Sunday, I'm like, I can absolutely see where people are coming from when they see it this way, and I think that's the case for a lot of people now. They're in a similar boat to me, like, no, that's not happening, shut up, you're crazy. And now, like, I still don't think it's happening, but I can see how you could see it that way. I mean, we have there are tweets going around that basically over 500,000 people boycotting the Super Bowl this year for a whole host of reasons, but including feeling like things aren't fair or whatever. And yeah, I mean, I definitely think that one, I think that Kincaid got the first down before even Josh Allen had the fourth down run, and then Josh Allen got the first down there. And so that's just, that's hard. And basically, I'm not looking at it and complaining about it saying it sucks that the refs like rigged it for the Chiefs. I'm more looking at it and saying it sucked that the refs took that game into their hands. It sucks that we look at so many other sports, soccer, tennis, they have, VAR. They have like, hey, the ball has, this chip in it, so we can actually read exactly where it is. And it's like, can you explain to me why we can't do that in the NFL? Like why we can't have it that way, and it is what it is. So who knows? We might see the first three-peat ever. if the Chiefs do it. That would be incredibly exciting if it happened. I think doing so would definitely, despite the ring disparity between Patrick Mahomes and Tom Brady, I think them winning it this year and him getting the three-peat and getting to 4 rings this early in his career, I think it would put him not on the same level as Brady yet, but it would mean he's close enough that it doesn't mean he has to get 7 to be on equal ground with Brady. Would be the way I personally look at it. I completely understand if other people are like, no, that's not the case, and look at it differently, but that's how I would view that and see that situation. So we'll see. I mean, I'd like to think that it'll be a good game. At the same time, we've seen Eagles Chiefs before. We saw Niners Chiefs last year. I don't know. I'm not really looking at it's funny because so many people are so like, oh, like we've seen this all over and over and over again. It's like, no, we've seen this happen once, and it was 2 years ago. And there's a lot of different guys on both of these teams than there were 2 years ago when this matchup happened. But at the same time, I also feel the exhaustion of like it feels like we're seeing the same thing over again, and like not in a cool way like it was when it was Warriors Cavaliers in like 4 straight finals, where it's like, oh, we're getting to see the Titans again, right? It feels more like okay, we're kind of stuck with this again. So that's sort of how I feel about the game itself. Like I said, we're going to talk a little bit more about it more in depth next week, really break some things down, and some like, hey, these are the things that we're watching out for. But yeah, that's sort of where I'm at on it. Nick, you have any final thoughts about it before we move on?
A comment that somebody made the other day that stood out to me was basically talking about how the quarterback disparity conference to conference just like feels pretty massive. Where Jaden right now, it's like, okay, is Jaden the best quarterback in the NFC? It's like him or Stafford maybe. And then you get into like Jordan Love and like other dudes like Dak Prescott, and like you're in that kind of bucket after that.
All right,
but AFC,
I have to cut you off to say that Jared Goff is not in that bucket. He is above that bucket.
Jared Goff is around. Jared Goff is around all those dudes. I would beg to differ. His year was better than those dudes, but I think longevity of career kind of plays out that kind of way. Whatever. I think Dak Prescott and him, like, that's a reasonable comparison as well. I think it's reasonable. Not perfect, but reasonable. I just feel like you look at those dudes, and those are all good quarterbacks. Like, all those are dudes who, if they were your franchise quarterback, you'd be like, okay, this is cool. Like, I'm good with this. This dude could be my quarterback for 7, 8, 9, 10 years, and I'm okay with it. But then you look at the other conference and you look at the AFC, and it's like, okay, Mahomes, he's a franchise quarterback, but is he the greatest quarterback of all time? And then it's like, okay, Josh Allen, he's not even the greatest quarterback in his conference, but is he the most talented quarterback, running over dudes, throwing, strong arm, doesn't turn the ball over anymore? Is he like the most talented dude ever? And then it's like, okay, Lamar Jackson, is he the best and most mobile quarterback ever? Like, fastest, can run, and can control from the pocket now? And then it's like, okay, then you got Joe Burrow. Okay, like, he plays kind of like a Tom Brady or like a Joe Montana with like some mobility and clutch factor. And he didn't even make the playoffs. And just for those 4 dudes to all be dueling it out, and like, all those 4 dudes are in the same conference, and you're not even getting then to CJ Stroud and other dudes after that. Mm-hmm. Like, there are those dudes, and to know that only 2 of them can get to an AFC championship, it's like, okay, Lamar's made it to 1 AFC championship because he's been losing to these other dudes, to Josh Allen, to Mahomes.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you may be a super talented quarterback, but you're running into other super talented quarterbacks. And so I feel like the disparity between quarterbacks conference to conference is kind of crazy, where I understand, and I'm there with you, where it's like Cavs versus Warriors, like, it just felt different. And I feel like part of the sentiment with this and why it's like Eagles, Chiefs again. Imagine if for the last 4 years, if instead of Chiefs versus whoever from the NFC, if it was Chiefs versus Bills in the Super Bowl, Chiefs versus Ravens in the Super Bowl, Chiefs versus Bengals in the Super Bowl. I feel like the concern as far as why it's not primetime television is the lack of elite QB play on the other side of the football field. And it just feels like it's been Mahomes versus Jimmy Garoppolo, Mahomes versus Purdy, Mahomes versus Jalen Hurts.
Yeah.
And it just feels like the lack of quarterback duel being able to raise the level of the entire offense has kind of made it more of, okay, this dude's at this level and the other team doesn't have that dude, so they're probably going to lose.
Right.
And so I feel like that's kind of where the disappointment and the lack of energy is. It's like, well, we've seen Mahomes play a dude who's not Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Lamar, and you know what he does? Win every single game. Win every single time in the playoffs. You know who he loses to? The greatest quarterback ever, and Joe Burrow one time. And that's it.
In his entire career as a starting quarterback, this is insane. Mm-hmm. His entire career as a starting quarterback, his worst finish is a loss in the AFC Championship game at home.
In overtime. Not even in regulation.
Right. Yeah. In overtime. Now, the thing that makes the Bengals one a little different is, yikes, he looked bad in the second half and overtime of that game.
Sure.
But still, that is his worst finish since he has been the starting quarterback for the Kansas City Chiefs. Their first-round draft pick at best has been 29. Like, that's nutty. That is crazy. Yeah. I think before we move on, and now that we're talking quarterbacks, Chris Canty was on First Take today and made probably the most asinine take I've ever heard. And he said that Joe Burrow is not an elite quarterback in the NFL. That's what he said. In his words, everybody wants to make everybody an elite quarterback in the NFL, and there can only be so many, and blah 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 blah. And I'm like, in theory, I hear you. But if we have 6 quarterbacks that at the end of their career could all be top 10 quarterbacks of all time, and that's not the situation we're in right now, but I'm just using this as a hypothetical, then, yes, you can have more than 3 elite quarterbacks in the NFL. Joe Burrow's numbers this year, he led the league in completions at 460. He led the league in attempts at 652. His completion percentage was 70.6%. 70.6%. He threw for 4,918 yards, led the league with 43 touchdowns, and had 9 interceptions. He lost 5 times this year when the Bengals scored 35 or more points. How can you look at Joe Burrow? And I understand the Bengals didn't make the playoffs. I understand that to some people, Joe Burrow is still considered good because he beat Patrick Mahomes in the playoffs that one time and made it to the Super Bowl. I think it's crazy that people think that, but I understand why people say that. But I don't know how you look at Joe Burrow and you don't say that he is an elite quarterback in the NFL. I understand what Mahomes has done and the fact that wins are a quarterback stat, and when you count them in, Mahomes is by far the best of the best in the NFL. I think if you take that away and you just look at their body of work statistically, I think there's an argument for any of those other 3 quarterbacks. But man, I don't know how you can say that Joe Burrow is not an elite quarterback in the NFL. That's just crazy to me.
Yeah, that's so silly. Canty saying that, it's just ridiculous. And the thing is, we've seen situations where there are more than 3 elite quarterbacks in the NFL. Circa 2010, turn of 2000 to 2010. It's okay, you still got Peyton Manning being Peyton Manning. Yep. You got Tom Brady being Tom Brady. You've got Breeze being Breeze. You got Big Ben being Big Ben. You got Phillip Rivers. You got Eli any random given year. He can make a Super Bowl run. Eli obviously not all the way up there, but that's 5 dudes who are all up there like Hall of Fame level
That's
dude.
5, and you didn't say Aaron Rodgers either.
Yep.
Like
Aaron Rodgers. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yep.
to say, just completely
Aaron
foolish.
Rodgers, MVPs, all in the so many in the 2010s. Ridiculous. Like, okay, are there only 3 elite quarterbacks there? The answer is no. The answer is clearly no. Okay,
Right.
Tom Brady, Peyton Manning, Drew Brees, Aaron Rodgers, like who of those isn't an elite quarterback?
Yeah.
Go ahead and tell me. Just tell me which one of them isn't. Like,
You have
it's
6. You just named 6 Hall of Fame quarterbacks. If you ask me, all 6 of those guys deserve to be in the Hall.
Mm-hmm.
But no, you're right. Sorry, Chris Canty, you're right. Only 3 elite quarterbacks in the NFL. And that was his argument. His argument is like there's when you have a podium, you have first, second, and third. Like there's, okay, you came in 4th, big whoop. You don't get a medal for that. It's like, okay. And you know what? We look at Josh Allen as like an elite quarterback, even though he's never won an MVP or never been to a Super Bowl. Like you don't get an award. You don't, the guy who comes in second in MVP and the team that comes in second in the Super Bowl, we're not, you don't get recognition for that. Like, it's just, it's crazy. It's crazy.
Silly. Yep.
So speaking of quarterbacks, though, we're going to move on and we're going to start talking as, the Senior Bowl is tomorrow as of us recording this. The Shrine Bowl was last night. The Hawaii Bowl was a week ago. It's time to start talking draft prospects for the NFL. And so there are a couple quarterback storylines that we've seen this week that we're gonna talk through a little bit, and then we're gonna do our sort of rankings of what we think sort of the top 5. It's weird because it's not like or actually our rankings of how we think they actually are, but more of like just what we kind of think the consensus is, or a consensus should be about these quarterbacks before we get to draft day. And so first, for starters, we should talk about Shedeur Sanders. Shedeur Sanders played in the Shrine Bowl. There were quite a few players that opted to not play in the game itself, but he also didn't even participate in practice at all this week. Frankly, it's frustrating that he was just kind of there. If you ask me, he was there, was the center of attention, all the lights, everyone wanted to know what Shedeur was doing, and he didn't even lace up at all or put pads on. I imagine I'm kind of looking at it thinking that he's heard from the Giants, like, listen, we're taking you at 3. The only way that we aren't is if, the Raiders are able to trade up and take you, at 2. But I mean, let's just think about, and this would be so Cleveland Browns, but let's just think about it. Titans take Cam Ward. The Browns decide we're going to trade back instead of taking Travis freaking Hunter. We're going to trade back with the Raiders so that the Raiders can take Shedeur Sanders. So it just sounds crazy that something like that would happen. And so I imagine that basically Sanders has been told by Joe Shane and the Giants and Brian Daboll, we're taking you. And so he sees no need to play, no need to throw at all. But that was that. Shedeur was there, not really playing. Not really playing. He didn't play at all, didn't participate at all. And so I guess the storyline is then, he's probably heard from the Giants at this point that let's go on the limb that is what's happened. The Giants have said we're taking you at 3. The only way it happens is if somehow the Raiders trade up and take you ahead of us, but there's just no way that that's going to happen. Nick, how do you see a fit of Shedeur with the Giants?
I just hope if Shedeur is drafted by the Giants, that the Giants are able to furnish him with a quality offensive line. Because I think if you have Shedeur Sanders and you have Brian Daboll and you have Malik Neighbors and you have a couple of those other receivers who they've drafted highly, if you're able to put together competent offensive line play with a quarterback who we feel like maybe the ceiling might not be the highest, maybe not the best straight up out into the league right now. I still feel, though, like, hey, you have running backs who can play a little. You have a superstar receiver. You have these kind of things that can make life easier for him. I feel like there are things that could make life easier. But I've also seen this Giants team just be an absolute disaster where things fall apart, players get injured, offensive line becomes a mess. I think this coach, the coach and the GM, I think both could be fired after this year, if not mid-season.
Right.
I just think that it's a really – there's so much potential for this situation to explode. So if I'd be Shedeur, I don't know that I'd want to go there. I think there is upside, though. I think there is a shot that things could all go really well for him there. There is a chance. But I think that you really have to hope that the front office and coaching staff are really motivated.
Yeah, I think. Excuse me. My concern for him is that I think any quarterback that gets taken in this draft is a quarterback that needs a team that's going to have patience with him. Like it just has to be there, right? Like I'm not seeing any quarterback in this draft class that I think like is a polished enough product. They're a Joe Burrow, they're a Trevor Lawrence, they're a CJ Stroud that like bam, show up, start day one, and automatically your team has been elevated significantly because of that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see any of these guys as that guy, and that's fine. And before, the last 15 years, that was okay. You were taking a quarterback and you were having him, even if he was a first-round pick, you were typically having him sit behind some veteran, some journeyman, just to learn what being a quarterback in the NFL meant. I'd say it all the time. Do we think Patrick Mahomes would be Patrick Mahomes without having that year sitting behind Alex Smith? I think he probably would still get there. I think there would be a lot more development, and he wouldn't have started off as hot as he did. It would have taken more time for him to get to the point that the Chiefs are this perennial Super Bowl contender. And so these guys need to have patience and need to have time. And that's my concern for Shedeur Sanders is that, I don't think that he's going to have patience or that he's going to have time with the Giants because GM that's probably going to get fired after this next year. I think he should have gotten fired this year. Coach that I actually don't think he should get fired. I think Brian Daboll is a good coach. The fact that he got the Giants to the playoffs and won a playoff game a couple years ago says a lot about him and what he's capable of doing as a coach. I think it's likely that Daboll and Joe Schoen will get fired at the same time, and I don't think that's fair. I think that Joe Schoen has made Brian Daboll's job ridiculously harder than it needs to be. But regardless, they're both on the hot seat, and we haven't even finished this current NFL season, let alone gotten into the real offseason for this next year and everything. And so that's my concern is that I don't think they're going to have time and can be patient with Shedeur Sanders because, football is a business and that's their job and nobody likes to get fired. And so obviously Daboll and Shane are going to do what they can to save their jobs. And I think Shedeur is gonna be the victim of all of that. And so that's my concern for him.
Yeah, I feel you there.
Yeah. Other quarterback storyline to talk about, Jalen Milroe out of Alabama. He is at the Senior Bowl this week in Mobile, Alabama. And, man, there have been some concerns. There have been a lot of reports that he has just not been performing very well. One of the most damning of him was a report that he was, quote, having an extremely hard time standing out at Senior Bowl practice. Milroe reportedly, quote, struggled much of practice, throwing interceptions, skipping balls, and having issues with accuracy all day long. At one point, Milroe reportedly missed 8 throws in a row during one-on-one drills. That is concerning if you are Jalen Milroe. Already, you were at best quarterback 3, but there were still serious concerns about your ability to throw. Obviously, he's a freak athlete and is a great runner, but there were already concerns about, hey, how good of a thrower is this guy going to be? And that combined with what came out. His hand measurements were that he was at 8 3/4 inches. I remember when Joe Burrow was coming out, people were concerned about his hand size, and Milrow's are significantly smaller than Burrow's were. So that being said, Milrow is quickly just not having a good week, and with how separated 1 and 2 are for our quarterbacks in this draft, and how bunched up it feels like everybody behind them are significantly lower and bunched up. I don't think it's going to take much to drop, and I don't think it's going to take much to move up either. And I think we're seeing the worst of that for Jalen Milrow right now.
Yeah, Milrow, I think, is suffering from, really, I think it's a two-part thing. I think these mobile quarterbacks, these hyper mobile quarterbacks, especially really need a lot of extra time in college, I would say, specifically, to be able to develop and get more snaps. You look at somebody like a Jalen Hurts, like he had to transfer from Alabama to Oklahoma, and he was a little bit older because of that, because Tua beat him out. And because of that, he had more time to develop, become more of a finished product, so to speak. I believe he didn't win the Heisman, I don't think, his last year. Maybe he did. He got close, though.
No, he wasn't. He would have been the third Oklahoma quarterback in a row to win it, because it was Mayfield, then it was Murray. And I think he was a finalist, but he didn't win it.
Right. He was a finalist. And I just feel like when you see these hypermobile QBs, that you need to have that extra time in college in order to learn how to do the game manager things. Because I feel like if you don't learn how to do that in college, it gets increasingly difficult to be able to do that in the league if you haven't already started building some of these good habits. You look at somebody like Justin Fields, who had a better college career, in my opinion, than Milrow, who had a career comparable, I would say, to like a Jalen Hurts as far as the positives. And he's somebody who still struggles a lot to throw the football with consistency. He's one of these quarterbacks who depends on his legs a ton. And then you look at the flip side of somebody who's stuck around a long while and developed his throwing motion, developed into the passer he is, in a Jaden Daniels, who we saw be a superstar this year as a rookie. And I think really it's a benefit for these young quarterbacks to kind of take their time to be able to develop and learn and be able to use their legs when they need to, not when they have, not to be able to use their legs decisively rather than to depend on them. Jane Daniels this year didn't have to use his legs all the time and didn't need to, because he wasn't able to pass the ball. He was able to complement his high-level passing with really high-end running as well. And I think that to be able to do that as a rookie out of the box is why they made it to the NFC Championship game.
Yeah.
And to be able to have that fresh out of there, like you look at somebody like a Lamar who wasn't anywhere near as polished a passer as Jaden Daniels as a rookie. And he's still, because he spent the bit of extra time in college, getting a lot of snaps. He got a lot of snaps, even though he was very, very young. He won a Heisman. He reached those levels in college. I feel like that just shows kind of what you got to be as a mobile quarterback in college to be able to make it at the next level. Somebody like an Anthony Richardson never got anywhere close to a Heisman, in my opinion, in college, or to be able to be like, okay, you stuck around and developed. He didn't do any of that stuff, and I think the fruit's kind of bearing itself right now for him.
Yeah.
I'm concerned for Milrow. I think that 2 years at Alabama starting, I think solid, but I don't think the progression there has been made. I don't think he's been able to rely on his arm and his progressions as he's needed to. I think he leans way too much on his legs, and I think that could really bite him as far as his potential as a quarterback.
Yeah. And I think, and like I said, we all know how gifted he is as a runner, and he is, but he's a freak of nature, just athlete wise. But yeah, I am concerned about his abilities, as a passer to make him a quarterback in the NFL. just what that looks like. I think, and I said this when we were talking before we started recording, that I think if he would be willing, and I think there are a lot of athletes across all sports, but especially in the NFL, that just need to be more willing to pivot, right? Like you're here, you're in this, just pivot a little bit, try something just a little bit different. I think if Jalen Milroe was willing to do what Taysom Hill does, I think he would be incredible at that. I think he would cut out quite the niche for himself on a team, doing that. Um, Question is he willing to do that? Is he able to put his ego aside to do that? We've seen a lot of other quarterbacks that haven't been willing to do that, and things have gone south quickly. So yeah, that's sort of where I'm at. At least when it comes to Jalen Milroe, as we're seeing him right now. Also, I mean, the NFL is the NFL. There are coaches there that have developed plenty of guys far better than we would have imagined. And so hopefully we can see that for him, and he can get developed in a way, go somewhere, like going to, say the Eagles when Jalen Hurts was taken, where he did sit behind a couple people for a little bit and got to play the tail end of the season and get developed before being asked to do it all. Hope we can see that for him.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I completely agree. Would you compared him to Taysom Hill? I feel like that's fair, but I don't feel like he has the body type for like the tight end H-back kind of thing. Do you feel like more of the comp of like the Louisville quarterback from a year or two ago, or
Malik Cunningham?
I feel like he could be more, and I'm not trying to profile, like put him into a niche, but I feel like the more speedy kind of way that he is, I'm like, is he more of like why am I forgetting his name? Either a Cunningham or a Terrell Pryor kind of could convert more to receiver than that H-back kind of thing.
Yeah. And I'm not comparing him to Taysom Hill like this is my player comp for him. More like, be willing to pivot a little bit, go into this niche where you're used in more special situations where it's like, hey, let's run the Wildcat with Jalen Milroe, who is a quarterback, and like this is a Wildcat where we actually need to be prepared for a pass, sort of thing. So not necessarily like, oh my gosh, he is Taysom Hill, because he's a far better runner, far more athletic than Taysom Hill. But sort of, finding a niche like that. The thing with Cunningham is the Patriots tried to convert him to receiver. We haven't heard his name since. The Terrell Pryor thing worked for a little bit and then kind of fizzled out. And so I could see that. But I feel like he is too gifted of an athlete and does have a good enough ability to throw. He does, obviously not great, not good enough to like be a day one starter in the NFL, but does have a good enough, ability to throw, and is athletic enough that it's worth trying to get the ball in his hands more than say just, hey, let's just strictly convert this guy to a wide receiver. That's sort of the way that I see it.
Got you. So more like a Cordell Stewart, like a Slash Stewart Steelers kind of. He still threw the football and still quarterbacked.
Yeah.
But a little bit of quarterback / running back / wide receiver more.
Right. Or view him different skill set, but view him the way teams have viewed Cordero Patterson, where it's like, listen, we just need to get him the ball. We need to get creative and find ways to get this guy the ball, because good things will happen when we do that.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Sweet.
Yeah. One other quarterback story to talk about, and this is one that obviously is more near and dear to my heart, is that Kyle McCord has had an incredible week at the East-West Shrine Bowl. All reports have said that he has been by far the best quarterback there. That isn't all that surprising considering some of the other talent that's been there. But I had the pleasure last night of speaking to a guy who is an agent in the NFL, just waiting in line to go to the bathroom. It's funny. I said bumping elbows and rubbing shoulders with people you'd never expect. This was one of those. I'm just waiting in line. He sees I'm wearing my Syracuse sweatshirt and asks me about, Kyle McCord wasn't playing last night. He was a did not participate. But what the way these things work, the way the Senior Bowl works and the East-West Shrine Bowl works is you really show off during the week of practice. The game happens, but for you do your work during the week of practice. And so McCord was by far the best quarterback there. He won all practice. He made the all practice team, of the best quarterback that was there, according to the scouts and coaches that were there. And so he sat out the game. But anyway, I'm talking to this guy, and he tells me that his stock has increased significantly this week, not just by what he's done, but with the way some of the quarterbacks like Jalen Milroe have looked over in Alabama at the Senior Bowl. And so I think we're in a very, very interesting place with him as a guy that, let's just think about the last year that Kyle McCord has had. He loses to Michigan, his only loss in an Ohio State uniform, gets kicked to the curb, goes to Syracuse, sets the ACC season record for passing yards in a season, on top of, being throwing the most yards, being the passing king this year in college football. Now he's played in the East-West Shrine Bowl this week and has just continued to move up and up and up and up and up the draft ladder. Will be really, really interesting to see how things sort of shake out for him. But Nick, we've talked McCord a lot because we've talked Syracuse a lot. You've been a good friend and have watched Syracuse this year because I'm a Syracuse fan. And so what's sort of your thoughts on Kyle McCord, how he's looked just this past week, but all season, and sort of, maybe not necessarily where we think he'll get picked, but what you think his prospects are moving into the NFL.
Yeah, so I quite like McCord as a prospect. I think he's shown the ability to game manage and provide a little bit more juice than that. He's not just a static pocket passer and that's all he does. He can do a little bit more than that. He's not a super dynamic athlete by any stretch, but I kind of see him almost in the vein of like a Brock Purdy, where like primarily from the pocket can beat you. You put him in a good system and like he can do a lot of good things and move a little bit around a little bit, not like the super huge, like 6'5" kind of quarterback with the rocket arm, not that kind of mold. And so that's kind of where I see what he could be theoretically at the next level. I feel like, to me, if you're talking NFL draft, there are guys who people think are first-round picks, guys who people think are third-round picks. But there are some guys in each of those rounds who people feel really super high on, where you're going to have people who you think are first-round picks, who you think, oh, yeah, this dude's a first-round pick. But if your team took him, you'd be like, I like him, but I don't love him. And then there are going to be dudes who are third-round picks who you're like, I love him. I think the fit's awesome. I think the value's really incredible there. I think whatever. To me, I heard a lot of things last year about Spencer Rattler in this vein, where it was like, okay, after all the quarterbacks that went early, then you had a big gap, and then you had Spencer Rattler, who I believe was the next quarterback taken far in round 3 or 4, I believe. He wasn't a top 2 round selected quarterback. Right. But when you heard coming out of the combine and out of Senior Bowl and everything, there were a lot of scouts and a lot of reports of, man, people love Spencer Rattler. People really like him as a quarterback, really like him as a dude. Like, this dude's a prospect that everybody loves. But he's a prospect who everybody loves as that round 3 kind of prospect, as that like mid-round kind of prospect. But they love him. They love him.
Yeah.
I think McCord could definitely be that kind of dude where it's like they love Kyle McCord, but they love him third round. They love Kyle McCord, but they view him as like a third round prospect, but they love him. And so I think he's definitely going to be a guy that if a team drafts him in that like middle kind of the rounds, that there are going to be a lot of guys out there, a lot of folks out there who say, wow, that's a really good pick. Wow, this is nice value for him. Wow, I think this team's really going to like him. The fan base is really going to like him. Yeah. If you see an overdraft of like, okay, a team really reaches because a quarterback need in like the first round, I think that the expectations could be a little bit too weighty as far as like, okay, he's not one of these prospects who's really raw, super arm talenty, super mobile that you want to put on the bench for a couple years. So I feel like the expectations could be really hard for him if you see him in a situation like that. But I think as a mid-round-ish type of prospect, I think he could be a really, really nice mid-round, find a niche in the league kind of prospect. So I think that's kind of how I view him.
Yeah, I think he's like the prime candidate for there is a team that is thinking about their future at quarterback. While they have a guy right now, they're thinking about, okay, what are we doing once we move on from this guy that would take him and would want him, as that guy. He was talked about a lot. Obviously, I said won the honors to all practice team. One of the things that stood out to me the most is something that Chad Reuter of NFL.com said, where he was at practice all week and gave sort of a top 10, guys that stood out at practice. And there was one thing that he said here that I think is really, really going to bolster, McCord's stock here. We know McCord is very accurate. He's a really, really good passer. He gets the ball in tight windows. 3 of his receivers were in the top 5 for contested catches this season, not because they were getting in space and he was throwing balls that turned into contested catches, but because he's fitting balls in tight areas. But one of the things that Reuter said was that McCord was able to change his arm angles to find creases for screens and quick outs and was accurate throwing while moving to his left and his right. And that's something that, you have accurate guys, and then you have accurate guys that on the run, and I think now we're sort of in it used to be a mobile quarterback meant a quarterback that could scramble around a little bit. Now a mobile quarterback is Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jalen Hurts, like Jaden Daniels, like we're running the read option and he's taking it and getting 20 yards, right? I think McCord, to those standards, clearly not a mobile quarterback, but I think he showed this week that to old standards of what a mobile quarterback could be, really, really elevated that part of his game this year and here since the season has been over, and that showed this last week, which could really, really help him. I could see him, like I said, being I think, let's put it this way. I think if a team, takes him if a team that is drafting in the first 10 to 15 picks of every round is taking him, that could be a concern. But I think if we're looking at like end of rounds he's getting taken, then that could be really good for him. So, in the first round, which I think would be, very surprising, but the Rams, right? They need to start thinking, what are we doing once the staff moves on? I think if it's like, oh, he's a second round pick and he's taken by the Raiders because the Raiders don't get their guy in the first round, they take him in the second round, I'm concerned for him, right? But if at the end of the second round, it's the Rams, maybe it's the Lions, they've seen what they've seen out of Hendon Hooker and they're like, okay, we think McCord is better than Hendon Hooker and will be, fit. He's more of a Jared Goff, than Hendon Hooker is and could fit into that. I think that could be, a good pick. So I think that'll be interesting just to see, how he moves up as other guys move down, and not just because guys above him, they've played bad this week, so he's the default moving up, but he played well enough this week to move up himself.
Yeah, 100%. I would say, though, with the Raiders, like, if the Raiders do bring in Russell Wilson since Pete Carroll's there, something like that, like Raiders, like top of the third round, if he's available, I think Raiders top of the third round, like sit behind Russell Wilson for like half the season plus. Like I don't hate that.
No, I don't either.
I'm not bothered by that.
Yeah.
I think top of the second round is still too early for me personally with him. Like, I feel like there are still some really good dudes typically in drafts who are still there in the top 50 picks.
Agreed.
So that's kind of where I'm at with that. But if you're talking about like 65, 70 kind of range for him, I'm like, okay, I still would like him maybe 10 picks later, 20 picks later, but I have no problem with early, mid, third round for him. I'm not bothered by that.
Yeah. All right. Having said all of that, talked about, a few of these quarterback storylines, and once we get here past the Super Bowl, it's going to be a lot of this, a lot of, draft analysis, player prospect analysis, stuff like that. And so we'll keep doing this. We're only talking about quarterbacks right now. There's still plenty of other spots on the field that have some interesting things going on this week and with these prospects, pro days, combine, stuff like that. But let's just do a quick sort of what our top 5 quarterbacks here in the draft class are. Not necessarily what we think the projections are that they're actually going to get taken, kind of like a quasi projecting where who's going to get taken when, and also where we would sort of rank them in terms of ability. It's a weird time because of that. So but yeah, we're gonna do this right now. And Nick, why don't you go first? We'll just go 1 through 5 for each of us, and then we'll go through.
So the thing is, the way I'm kind of looking at it is like we talked about this a little previously of like Riley Leonard, like he's a quarterback, but like I don't know that I draft him to use him like a quarterback straight up. So are we talking about these dudes as far as top 5 quarterback, like either starter or backup kind of quarterback, or just like
quarterbacks to be quarterbacks, I think.
Okay, got you. Because quarterbacks to be quarterbacks, like we talked about Riley Leonard, and I'm like, I wouldn't draft him to be a quarterback. I'd draft him to be Taysom Hill, and I'd love him for that. Like I'd love him as weapon kind of player, but as a quarterback, not so much. All right, cool. So off the top, same top 2 probably as everybody else. That'd be Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders. I feel like Cam Ward to me is probably the top dude as far as ability to make the spectacular play and the ability to throw the ball at a high level. Like I just think he has those quarterbacking traits. My main concern with him more than anything else is I feel like he kind of just gets bailed out by his offensive line in terms of like so many of his big plays. It's just like, okay, he's standing there and his offensive line gives him 5 seconds and then he makes a big throw and it's like, okay, everything's awesome. Everything's cool. But life's just not like that in the NFL. Your offensive line's probably going to be a mess. You're going to have blitzes coming at you from all angles. These defensive coordinators love to put pressure on you. And so I just feel like I haven't seen him under immediate pressure consistently and making plays, doing that, being able to make the right read, make the right check down. And so those are kind of my concerns with him. But besides that, I think he's a cool player.
Yeah.
Shedeur Sanders, easy second best player for me as far as the quarterback goes. I think that he's pretty steady. He doesn't offer the super high end for me either, as far as like, I don't think he has the mobility of like superstars like Lamar or Jaden, and I don't think he has the arm talent or arm flexibility to be able to make some of these ridiculous throws like a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes. But I think he definitely could be a really steady quarterback for a good stretch. I heard the comparison to Geno Smith. I'm okay with that as far as physical attributes and stuff. I think Geno's arm was stronger than Shedeur's. But besides that, I'm kind of cool with the size kind of look to him. After that, I feel like that's kind of when it gets interesting, because then you're into the Milroe, Dart, Ewers, like into that kind of mix. When you're in that kind of mix, I think I'm between 2 dudes, and that would be Milroe and actually your Kyle McCord. I feel like they're such different players and prospects, and I feel like I've been so turned off by the Jalen Milroe type of player because I just don't know if I trust him being that quarterback dude. Mm-hmm. And so because of that, I think that I'd go Kyle McCord next, and then I'd go Milroe right after that. I just think that Milroe has the traits that basically almost no one else in the class has, but I think he hasn't been able to put it together much at all. And so I think that putting him any lower than 4 would really be concerning to me, because it's like, wait a second, what of any of these dudes afterward can either game manage or has the talent more than Milroe? And so I don't think you can really put him much lower than that, if any. After that, I haven't watched a lot of these dudes, but I think I'd probably go with Ewers. I think his floor is probably a bit higher than a couple of these other dudes, but I just don't really like him that much. And I don't like Ewers really, but I think that his sheer number of snaps he's taken, I'm like, could he be like a Colt McCoy where he's like a backup for a really, really long time and like can pick up a win for you here or there when your starting quarterback's injured? I feel like maybe he can kind of live in that kind of space. So that, I guess, is where I'm at with the class, but I just don't love this class as far as when you're getting much deeper than 4 nearly. Like I'll probably give it another look through, but just not very thrilling, I would say. Dylan Gabriel, I think the height is too much of a concern. I think he's just pretty darn short. I think that Curtis Rourke isn't an NFL caliber player really at all, especially the age and lack of ceiling kind of talent with him. I think's really not very mouthwatering to any of these teams. Dart, I want to study, but haven't yet. And Will Howard, I want to give a look at. And he had a really good playoffs. Will Howard did. So those are probably going to be the dudes that I'll glance over again. But that's kind of where I'm at with it.
Yeah, I've also got Cam Ward at 1 and Shedeur Sanders at 2 for a lot of the same reasons. I think one of the things that, is worth thinking about is we saw in 2023 what Shedeur Sanders without a good O-line looks like. And we saw him in 2024 what Shedeur Sanders with a decent O-line looks like. And that's something we have to think about. If you're one of these guys that's getting taken near the top, you're not going to a place with a great O-line. And so I think, again, we talked about Sanders already and what we think would be best for him if he does go to the Giants. But I think we need to recognize that. At 3, I do have McCord. I think he is just really, really shown this week. But throughout this whole year, how good of a quarterback he is, how good of a thrower of the football he is. All of the reports have been, his spirals have been tight. He's been accurate. There were a lot of throws during the regular season, this last year that it was like, okay, that is an NFL throw. That is a layering over and in front of certain defenders right into a receiver that's like, dang, And so I've got McCord at 3. I think, again, said we're doing quarterbacks to be quarterbacks. And I think I think like Milroe's kind of in a ghost spot at 4 for me, because I do think his best attributes, the best use of his skill set, would not be as a quarterback in the NFL. And so he's sort of like parentheses at 4, but because of that, my real number 4 is Dylan Gabriel. Actually, we've seen over the last couple of years, Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix this year are great examples of, hey, instead of being afraid of older guys that are experienced, let's recognize how much better they look when they show up because they have experience. Because Gabriel is one who's moved around. He's had different OCs, has had to learn different offenses, has shown that he's capable of doing that. And so I'm a big believer in Dylan Gabriel. You mentioned his size. He's listed at 6 foot. I think, there's shorter quarterbacks. There's certainly bigger quarterbacks, but it didn't seem to mess with him these last couple of years between Oklahoma and Oregon. So I've got Dylan Gabriel there. And then next, I've got Jackson Dart. I really liked what I saw of Jackson Dart this year. The Florida game felt like an anomaly, and I'm giving all of these quarterbacks one anomaly game. Part of that's because I think that it's worth doing for Kyle McCord the Pitt game. And so if I'm willing to do it for him in that Pitt game, I need to be willing to do it for a lot of these guys. And some of these guys, Ward and Sanders this last year, their anomaly, is not actually really one that you want to cut out. So that's, they've obviously gotten that. But the Florida game for Dart was weird, but I think we're too quick to look at like, hey, this was a one-time thing. It's not like this is the worst that we've seen out of this quarterback in a consistent manner. It's like this is the worst that we saw out of this quarterback one time, and we didn't see it ever at all any other time. And so like let's not be like, oh, see, that happened in one game, which means that's the floor and the quarterback is that bad, like let's recognize weird things happen. Football is a game that any week anybody can beat anybody. And so I've got Jackson Dart there at 5 for me. Like I agree with you. This is an underwhelming quarterback class. But in some ways, I feel like it makes it more interesting because we have more of these guys that are more closer together, and we have more of these guys that we're not looking at as show up and change my franchise. And so I think that could honestly be better for all of these guys outside of Ward and Sanders that we've mentioned. That like, okay, well, these guys aren't as good as them and aren't going to get drafted that high, but also means that they're going to be a developmental project sort of thing and could actually be better off for them in the long run.
Sweet. I just wanted to spend just a minute here as far as like Shrine Bowl, you were there, and Senior Bowl's right around the corner right here. Any particular dudes who you've seen in either of these practices where it's like, okay, this dude stood out for a good or bad reason, and what did they do that really caught your eye? Like what made them either a stud or concerned you with them?
Yeah. So one of the things for me that is really, really interesting about this draft is the number of players that are really, really good. Like really, really good. Like, yes, we talked about the weak quarterback class, but you look at defensive ends, you look at running backs, you look at wide receivers, you look at tight ends. There are a lot of guys that are really, really good, aren't going to get taken in the first round because, there's only 32 spots. And I think defensive end is like the best one of these, or best example of this. And there's a defensive end at the Senior Bowl that really, really struck my eye. There was one highlight that I saw that I was like, holy crap. And that is Mike Green out of Marshall. Now you've been talking about for a while. I earlier on in the season, I watched the Marshall Ohio State game and saw this dude and was like, all right, this dude can play. And I've been paying attention to him. But this highlight, if you haven't seen it, go check it out. He's doing a one-on-one rep against Josh Connerly Jr. out of Oregon. He's an offensive lineman. He's an offensive lineman that a lot of people are thinking is going to get drafted in the first round. Mike Green runs this dude over like he's a tackling dummy.
Yep.
Dude, I was like, that is insane. There's so many defensive ends that were like, edge is one of those premier positions that is like basically the only position on the defensive side of the football that it's like, hey, it's worth using like a top 3 pick on if you've got a guy. And there were a ton of these edges that we were talking preseason. Oh, they might be that guy. Oh, they might be that guy. James Pierce out of Tennessee, Abdul Carter out of Penn State, who I personally think is the best player in this draft. There are some other guys that, and one of the weird things also with this year, a lot of these guys that it's like, hey, they're lottery pick guys got injured, and it's like, okay, kind of pulled him back to the pack a little bit. Probably will still be going that high, but still it's like, okay, well, now there's discussion, right? There were a lot of guys from Georgia that, on the defensive side of the ball that had that high of a grade that now it's like, I don't know. Mike Green is the dude that it's like, he didn't get hurt, and he's taken advantage of some of these guys getting pulled back to him just in terms of like, like when you think about them, like, okay, they're kind of now closer in the same atmosphere as Mike Green. And now Mike Green is having this week that he's having. That's like, okay, now he's also pulling himself up to where they are. I'm telling you, this clip, it's insane. It is literally insane on Josh Connerly Jr., who's probably going to get drafted in the first round because of his versatility as an offensive lineman. He's moved around a good bit across the line at Oregon. But yeah, my goodness, Mike Green has been my biggest standout to me so far.
Yep. I've seen the clip you're talking about, and man, when that happened, the one thing about that clip that I'm like, no, is that Green absolutely like mauls him, knocks him over. But he also falls on the ground, and I'm like, no, Mike, if you could have just bull rushed the hell out of him and then just stepped right forward to the quarterback and not fallen down right there. But I was like, oh. The best thing, though, about Mike Green that, like, we're talking about a dude who just absolutely bull rushed like a top 2 round type of offensive lineman. And Mike Green isn't even like a pure power rusher. Like this dude's not like one of these 6'5", 270 kind of edge rushers. This is a dude who has speed, who has quickness, who has power, and who's got moves. Like this dude's got a tool belt where spin move, chop, dip, and rip. Like he's got a whole tool belt and the power to do that to Connerly, and he's got speed to turn the edge. Like he's a legit dude, as you've seen. He's a baller.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
100%. I love Mike Green as well. I've seen some of his clips and I really like him. A couple of the other dudes just hit on. I think my favorite dude who I've seen, who I'm just starting to put an eye on, is Azariah Thomas out of Florida State, I believe. He's a cornerback. He's got the length and speed and ability to kind of turn and follow with these receivers. Where in these one-on-ones, he might get beat by a half a step, but it doesn't even matter because he's got the speed to catch right up to the dude. And in one of these one-on-ones, he easily makes an interception, getting back in phase and getting the ball. His ability to, I just value mirroring a receiver as a DB, being able to have the length, speed, and mirroring skills to do that. So impressive. Azariah Thomas, he's apparently rising up boards a ton. Where in the league, they're looking at him as a potential second or first round player. He's really, really good. When I was watching these receiver and corner one-on-ones, I forget if it was the American or national side that he's on, but he was clearly the best receiver or corner there. Like he was the one who flashed the most out of all the receivers and corners there. And that included Fannin and Tez Johnson out of Oregon, who also balled out. Restrepo, I also saw some clips of his from there. Restrepo actually looked pretty slow and kind of underwhelming in that kind of way. I was a little disappointed with him in those one-on-ones. Other dude that kind of surprised me was the Oregon defensive tackle / like D lineman, Jamari Caldwell. I don't know how to say this that it doesn't come off as like mean, but like if you look at him, my guess is that he'd be like 6 foot, 6'1", 6'2", which like defensive tackle, that's not that big. But the dude's got to be heavy. This dude's carrying a lot of weight on him. He just looks stacked up, just a bunch of weight on him, big old defensive tackle. But he moves with a ton of quickness. If you watch him in some of these one-on-ones, watch him play, like he's got an insane amount of quickness for somebody whose body type looks pretty sloppy, I would say. It's pretty impressive though, where I'm like, okay, this dude's a big dude. And I know big dudes because I am a big dude. And this dude is moving way faster than a big dude should move for being as big as he is. And he doesn't even look like one of those big dudes where it's like, well, he's 320 pounds, but like most of it's muscle and he's pretty jacked. And like, that's where most of the 320 is. It's like, no, he's probably 320, 330, and like he looks a little bit round, a little bit soft, but is moving really well for how big he is. So that his movement was super impressive to me on the D line. Yeah,
there are a couple other guys that are at the Senior Bowl that I think are worth talking about. One, and I'll go with him first. And yes, you know what? I'm biased. I'm a Syracuse fan, but that's okay. That's, fine. I'm not calling games and being biased when I call games or anything like that. LaQuint Allen has had a great week at the Senior Bowl. So someone said, there was not a more natural pass catcher out of the backfield at the Senior Bowl this week. Which is a great sign for him. He was 1,000-yard rusher this year. Looked really, really good. Chris Johnson, CJ2K, actually had some very, very nice comments about LaQuint Allen and what he's done, not just this year, but throughout his whole career and this week as well. CJ2K said, quote, LaQuint Allen from Syracuse showed good burst and power, good route running, and a good hands, and is ready to compete with anybody. He will be a gem of the whole draft out of running backs. He is hungry. Chris Johnson is saying something like that about you. That's that's a pretty good sign about what you're doing. But the other guy that I want to mention is Walter Nolan, defensive lineman out of Ole Miss. I'm pretty sure he made first team honors at second team honors at the Senior Bowl. And I mean, he's a freak, dude. He is big. He is great. He's a great, defensive, lineman, defensive tackle when it comes to run stopping, but also he's a surprisingly good pass rusher. Typically when you're thinking pass rushers, you're thinking edge, right? That's where edges get the sacks. Defensive linemen get, sometimes get tackles for loss, but typically are get like, hey, I made a tackle after a 2-yard gain instead of a 4-yard gain. Like, haha, they do dirtier work without getting all the glory for it. But he started his career at Texas A&M, had looked great at A&M, finished his career this year at Ole Miss and looked great this year as well. And obviously Graham out of Michigan is going to be the top defensive lineman taken, but I would not be surprised if Walter Nolan is the second one that gets taken off the board.
Wow. Awesome call out. We definitely are going to be doing a lot more of this draft stuff in the next couple of months. I'm super fired up about it. I'm a big draft nerd, man.
Yep. We'll do mock drafts. That'll be fun. Maybe we each do a 1.0 mock draft and then go through it together. That could be a good time. Yeah. So a lot of exciting things on the horizon. Draft season is always fun this time of year. I'm with as boring as everyone seems to act like the Super Bowl is. Who knows? We might get more and more people that are more interested in this, here over the next week and a half or so. But Nick, it's been great talking with you as always. Thank you all so much for watching and for supporting us. Like, comment, and subscribe. We love doing this and just getting to come together and talk sports, talk football. So have a great rest of your day, everybody.